Hello, everyone, and welcome to another PDN Live. I'm your moderator, Shannon, and tonight's topic is unarmed self-defense. So with me, I've got Rob Pincus, the Executive Director of Personal Defense Network. Hi, Rob. How's it going? What have you been up to?
Great. As has been kind of what I've been doing since the baby was born in June. I haven't been traveling all that much. Did a big week in Silverton, Colorado, and did some training there. I went out to the Polypalooza 3 event in August, and of course we're getting ready for our annual, I think we're at ninth annual Combat Focused Shooting Instructor Conference coming up in Phoenix, Arizona, where our guest is tonight, coming up in just a couple weeks at the end of September.
Awesome. And with us tonight is Cecil Burch of Immediate Action Combatives. Welcome, Cecil. Good to have you here. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and how it applies to unarmed self-defense.
I've been involved in martial arts and self-defense for 31 years. Yeah, 31 years now. It's awful to say. I always had an interest as a kid in self-defense and martial arts and Bruce Lee movies, and I got in right in Chuck Norris. That's how old I am, when Chuck Norris was first in the movies. Soon as I got my driver's license, I joined the local karate school, and pretty much I've been training under a coach nonstop since then. There hasn't been a time that I haven't been training with somebody, and I've been doing that. I've kind of went through all the cool guy arts all through the 80s and 90s up until where I am now, where I'm a little bit more focused on how the unarmed hand-to-hand stuff interacts with actual weapons and weapons usage.
Great. Well, good to have you here. For those of you that are listening live, if you have any questions during this broadcast, please type them in the comment section below, and we'll do our best to get around to them. You can find us online, personaldefensenetwork.com, on Facebook, Personal Defense Network, on Twitter, P_D_N, and on Instagram at PD Network. So also joining the 280,000 strong, you can sign up for our newsletter. The link's below. And we'll jump right in. So Cecil, what are some of the effects of pop culture on perceptions of unarmed self-defense and its effectiveness? And how do you address students that have developed this unrealistic expectations because of this?
Well, a lot of it is, I'm just as big a fan of all the martial art movies and TV shows and all the action scenes as much as anybody, but unfortunately it's given two big things, I think. One is that one or two cool strikes will take out a guy. All you have to know is one or two good moves and guy goes crashing to the ground. And then also the fact that nothing really bad happens to you when you're doing this. You never suddenly get punched. You never get hit. You never slip while you're doing all this stuff. And believe me, all those things happen, and the guys don't get taken out of the fight quite as simply as one or two moves. I wish that were the case. It would make my job a whole lot easier teaching-wise. Really, the only way you can deal with it is you have to put people through some kind of realistic training, and by that I don't mean you got to go beat them up or everybody has to get torn up, injured, all that kind of stuff. But you actually have to apply some physical actions and have some physical actions applied to you, and then you get a feeling, oh, it's not quite as easy as Chuck Norris makes it look, or Billy Jack, or whoever's the cool guy of the moment.
Rob, I'm curious if you see any of this in your classes. You teach all around the country. Do you see it even in topics outside of unarmed self-defense, of these pop cultural perceptions?
I don't see it as much in the people that actually show up to the classes, right? Like in social media, in conversations at conventions or different, trade events. It's what I find more frustrating than the novice or the amateur, the neophyte coming in and sort of having these misconceptions because of the pop culture and the media is people inside of our community who will still play to what those misconceptions and preconceptions are, as opposed to trying to really educate the public. You know, I think anybody who's involved in any professional endeavor, or anybody even who's a high-level expert as a hobbyist, can watch a sitcom or a drama or a movie and see the mistakes being made by the actors trying to portray the experts. You know, if you're a medical professional, watching House is probably, you know, just as annoying as Cecil watching, you know, a Jet Li movie and me watching, you know, The Expendables or whatever in terms of our areas of profession. So I wrote an article a long time ago with like top 10 best firearms movies, and not for their credibility, just for their use of guns, right? Like for how well they address the use of firearms or the non-use of firearms in some cases. And I still feel like we need to treat that as media and entertainment, not as some training venue. And that's probably the most important message to get to the bigger audience, especially those new to defensive training. Entertainment, not education.
Mm-hmm. And Cecil, is there a way for people to work on unarmed defense skills without actually getting on the mat? Thinking of those with physical limitations, like a pacemaker, or those with injury and in recovery?
Sure. I think, you know, it all boils down to physical action. And you can train physical action just through movement by doing the actions of essentially shadow boxing with no energy or whatever. I don't have a problem with that. I think that's a useful part of training. Where I have a problem is if people fool themselves into thinking that that's the same as working hard against another resisting opponent or multiple opponents and feeling that physical pressure. Somebody who's injured, somebody who's certain physical disabilities, I think the best approach is to figure out how far you can push it safely. I've dealt with a lot of people who come in, start going, oh, I know I can't do this, I have this injury, or I have a heart problem, or here. Well, sure, okay. You can't train like you're a professional fighter. You can't train like you're getting ready to kick in a door with Delta, but you can at least do something. You can, maybe we'll just do this little very light resistance over here, or you can practice some physical movements over here. It's all good. We just have to understand if we're having a limitation on our training, there's going to be some limitation in functionality as well.
And would you work around those limitations in technique on training them and applying it to real-world situations outside of the mat?
Oh, sure. I do that all the time. One of my regular students is a 70-year-old retired dentist. He weighs probably about $130 soaking wet. You know, is he as capable a fighter as the 22-year-old 200-pound guy? No. But he does what he can do. There's a lot of times he won't train with that really tough guy or that big guy, the guy who's the newer guy who's maybe a little spazzy in his actions. But he can go and train with tough guys, with, you know, guys who are working hard, and he can work hard too. We've had people with amputated limbs. We've had people with I haven't worked directly with Down syndrome. I have worked with people with cerebral palsy. So you can do those things. I think as an instructor, it's on the instructor to figure out, okay, how far can we go with our training to make it real, to give these people something functional without just destroying them. You know, the last thing I want to do is have somebody come train with me, have a horrible experience because I was Mr. Drill Instructor and never wants to train again, says, well, I just can't do it. I'd rather, let's do a little bit, let's do what we can, and if that's not super fighter, at least it's better than nothing. It's better than sitting on the couch. It's better than acquiescing to losing.
Mm-hmm. So, Rob, how important is it integrating unarmed and armed training?
Ooh, I think it's incredibly important. Cecil alluded to it a second ago. That's kind of a part that he's been concentrating on more recently. I think, if you go all the way back to, I'll be honest, on this topic, I had kind of given up on realistic unarmed training because of just so many bad experiences of unrealistic training protocols, or like the police academy, or the kind of stuff we learned in the police academy that we ended up never employing, unless the subject was compliant. Somebody was really fighting us. It was, a lot of it was improvised and kind of just, it is what it is. And, the era before dash camera videos and like that, and just whatever happens, happens. But when the dash camera videos started becoming more common, we started seeing that pretty much every fight was improvised and didn't look like what the, high block, move, arm here kind of thing looked like on the mats or in the dojo or in a lot of the kind of canned training that I've been through. So when I came back to really taking unarmed training seriously and not just saying, hey, be strong, be quick, and figure it out, was because of the integration, right? So we started integrating for SWAT team training. We started doing our extreme close quarters tactics programs in the late 1990s, first formal classes in the early 2000s, really realizing that most of our SWAT training was running through a room, looking for a target and shooting it. Except most of our SWAT operations, nationally in law enforcement, aren't shooting anybody. They're capturing people or pushing people out of the way or just securing people so that evidence can be collected or arrests can be made. So the need to fight and touch people while wearing and holding guns, and then possibly having those fights escalate to the point where you need to use a gun, becomes very obvious when you start really looking at what's actually happening, particularly for law enforcement, because you're always we're carrying at least one gun and a bunch of other defense tools. And then we start looking at personal defense. We saw a great need for that also. We started teaching in the private sector. Of course, Cecil and I both, another PDN contributor, Craig Douglas, is another great guy who's been a leader in the integration of combatives and armed responses. And of course, Cecil's worked with him a lot as well. So I think it's incredibly important.
Cecil, what do you think about integrating unarmed and armed training?
Oh, I definitely think it's a must. I kind of was in the same place Rob was, where I was just frustrated. I'd grown up, like I said, I was always into martial arts and self-defense and the hand-to-hand thing, but I also grew up in Arizona, where if you weren't shooting and hunting by the time you were 12, you were kicked out of the state. That was the generation I grew up in. So there was always this idea that they went together. There wasn't one or the other. And then through especially the 90s, early 2000s, and you go on internet discussion forums, and I would go on a martial art oriented one and talk about guns, and they'd treat me like I was Hitler or something. And I go on the gun forum and talk about martial arts, and they'd look at me like I was a pedophile. So it just became real frustrating, and I just thought it just seemed obvious to me that they do go together. Not every physical interaction is going to require you to do a mag dump into somebody. Certainly we want that as an option, but it's not going to be the answer to everything. And so we've got to have that continuum of everything from situational awareness, getting out of this, not letting us get there, de-escalation, deselection, and on up through empty hand stuff, through pepper spray, knives, and even into firearms. And they all go together. If we don't do that, none of it's going to make sense when we actually have to use it.
So is it possible to learn too many techniques, and what techniques have you taught in the past?
Oh, for sure. You definitely, I always say that the bane of the gun guy is gear. I want more gear. I want new guns, more ammo, more holsters, more stuff. Well, the bane of the martial artist is techniques. Give me another technique. Give me another technique. Oh, I spent 2 minutes learning this technique. That means I know it and I've mastered it. Give me another one. and it becomes this obsessive desire to have more techniques as the answer to every possible solution, when generally the answer is having a handful of robust, reliable techniques that you, not your instructor, not the guy next to you, but you can do in as big a variety of situations as possible. So it's a lot of cutting away the excess.
So you've done 2 great DVDs for PDN. One was on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and one for surviving the knockout game. What are the biggest takeaways people can get from those DVDs?
I think one of the things I think I teach slightly different from, I would say, the majority of people teaching martial arts and self-defense is that I start, everything I think should be built on a foundation of worst case scenario. Everything should be built on everything going wrong. I think too many people start with, I know the attack's coming, I'm prepared for it, I can go through my mental Rolodex of cool guy moves, and they will work. And that works really well in a gym setting, on the mat, when you're taking pictures for a magazine or filming a video clip or a DVD. The problem is that has a tendency to break down if those things are not going your way. So a lot of everything I start with in my fundamental coursework and on the DVDs was all about, okay, your situational awareness was not what it should have been. The attacks already happened. You found yourself on the ground. What do you do? You found yourself getting punched. What do you do? And so the techniques are very robust, very high percentage functional moves. Not too many of them. I mean, on the surviving the knockout game, it's essentially one basic move with a couple follow-ups. That's really, the 70+ minutes of the DVD. The ground-oriented DVD was probably 4 or 5 physical actions on the ground, but they work. They work for everybody. I've been doing this for a really long time now, doing it in this manner for 8 and 10 years now, I guess, going on 10 years, teaching it this way, and had a lot of feedback, real-world feedback too, not just training feedback. And so trying to get that idea across is, hey, let's deal with the worst possible situation. When we have a reasonable solution, something that we can count on, then let's go and add all the cool guy moves. Let's go and add the stuff that looks good on the cover of Black Belt magazine.
For those of you that are joining us now, this is PDN Live. The topic tonight is unarmed self-defense with our special guest, Cecil Burch of Immediate Action Combatives. And we also have Rob Pincus with us, Executive Director of Personal Defense Network. Join the 280,000 strong and sign up for our newsletter. The link is below. And if you have any questions during this live broadcast, please type them below in the comment section and we will do our best to get to them. So Rob, what do you think of the cliche of all fights to the ground?
Yeah, there was, and I bought into it. I bought into this idea, again, kind of when I was in this real evolutionary period of looking at combatives training and unarmed training as needing to be integrated, this idea that everything goes to the ground. And of course, in the mid-90s, we had the UFC and Royce Gracie, and everybody get all fired up about grappling and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu primarily, and I got really into it, and I know a lot of people did, a lot of other people in law enforcement and security work really bought into that cliche, well, we've always got to get into contact, and fights will always go to the ground, so you really have to be good on the ground. And the problem was, you figure out real quick that being really good at tying a guy up only helps if there's not a third guy that's going to come in and step on your face. Being really good at taking a guy down maybe feels very different on asphalt than it does on a mat in a dojo. So the comfort and supremacy that you can feel and the confidence you can gain from getting really good at a close-in grappling game isn't always applicable on the street in the first place. That's assuming the cliche is true. But the reality is when we look at a lot of fights, sometimes you get pushed up against a car. Sometimes you get pushed up against the wall. Sometimes you end up on a table. Sometimes it stays standing and one guy gets knocked down and doesn't get back up, especially in the case where the good guy is doing what he's supposed to do, which is creating space and time and avoiding, de-escalating, or getting away, escaping. So what I think, unfortunately, a lot of us started doing was almost being anxious to get tied up. Like we felt in control there. So taking something to the ground when maybe it would have been better just to create distance with a strike or with some other technique, get control, and then create that space to access a better tool or to escape a situation might have been a much better situation. And of course, if you stay standing, you can deal with multiple attackers much better than if you're on the ground in almost every case. So I think not only is it not true, it's also a dangerous myth to play to. I'm really curious about Cecil's thoughts, though.
No, I agree. I hate the idea of having some dogmatic, set-in-stone approach to everything. Always go to the ground, never go to the ground. I just think both those are stupid. I think the idea is let's be functional at all those places. We don't have to be super expert. We don't have to. You don't have to follow my path and spend 22 years of this obsessive search for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and competing and all that kind of stuff. You can get reasonably decent and a little bit of work, figure out how to deal with all those different situations, and then train them so that you make the right contextual decision. Is it the right thing to go to the ground now? Okay, great, let's go to the ground. Is it the right decision to disengage and make space? Great. You've done that because you've got the ability to do that. I think just blindly following, saying, oh, all fights or 95% of fights go to the ground, I mean, they don't. They don't. A good number do, so you better understand how to fight there. And you certainly need to know if you find yourself on the ground when you're not prepared for it. You slip, you get knocked down, you get taken down. That's not the time to just be sitting there going, oh, I wish I'd have known how to figure out how to grapple at this point. But I think we can't follow any pathway. That's no different than saying that every physical encounter, I can just pull my gun and shoot the guy. They're all wrong. We have to make the right decision. You know, I'm sure there are, you know, I don't want to get into too many, you know, political things, but there are people in the recent last couple of years who probably wish they'd have made different choices, or at least had the ability to make different choices. So I definitely agree that you shouldn't just blindly follow just because somebody said this and it sounds good doesn't mean we need to follow it.
So you touched on it a little bit, and we had one of these questions come in. Is the gun the best tool to try to employ if you find yourself losing in an attempt to defend yourself with unarmed techniques?
Oh, man, there's so many ifs, ands, or buts about that. I'm assuming he's talking about he's engaged in a situation, the unarmed techniques aren't working or they're starting to not work. And then it's go to the gun. The problem is if by definition your unarmed techniques aren't working and you go to the gun, at that moment the other guy's in control and you introduce a gun into that equation that you are losing, you've probably just handed it to him as opposed to being able to bring it to bear and use it. That's the thing I think people forget about, where they say, oh, I'll just get my gun out and shoot the guy. If a guy tries to take me to the ground, I'm going to shoot him. If a guy sucker punches me, I'm just going to shoot him. Well, it sounds real good until you start to do that. If you don't get to go for the gun until he's already hit you 2 or 3 times, or as Rob said, maybe slammed you against the car and he's pounding away, that might not be the best time to try to get the gun out because he's already winning the fight. You just say, hey, let's do this, and he goes, oh, I'll take that from you and use it on you. I don't know that it's the answer. I guess if your only choice is you're going to die anyway, maybe, but that's where I think you need to have some skills, and that's why I think training becomes an important thing. It's no different than going to the gun store, buying a gun, shooting a box of ammo, and thinking you're particularly, you can handle all situations with the gun. You need a little bit of training.
Rob, do you address any of that sort of training in your classes that you do, or any of the PDN classes on going hand to hand and then going to firearm?
Yeah, I mean that's what the extreme close quarters the extreme close quarters tactics course and the extreme close quarters counter ambush course is really focused on what happens when you believe the gun is the answer, right? It's a course aimed at people who either are armed professionally, using in the military side the extreme close quarters counter ambush, moving through buildings with long guns in their hands and pistols on their side with a team, thinking, okay, the gun's going to be the solution. And then the course is what happens when that doesn't work out, when the gun malfunctions, somebody gets inside the gun, something else happens. As Cecil was talking about, we both agree on this importance of counter ambush approaches to training and not assuming you're going to be on balance all the time. The extreme close quarters tactics is all about the fundamentals of striking, 2, 3, 4 things. Fundamentals of grappling, 2, 3, 4 things, so that you can maintain or gain enough control to be able to access that gun in those classes. But the fact is, I think, going back to the other question you asked, Cecil, it may not be that the gun, right? I could certainly imagine many scenarios and circumstances where if I'm carrying a knife and a gun, I have a much better opportunity to use that knife than I would a gun because of the angles of the bodies, the position I'm in, where that tool is kept. So is the gun the best tool when I'm losing an unarmed confrontation, I think, or something I tried to solve with an unarmed technique? Was the original question, I think. No, I mean, I may purposefully choose a different tool, whether that's in law enforcement capacity carrying a taser, or a baton, maybe as a coup baton or an impact or a pressure device to gain extra leverage that I can't maintain, or I can't gain enough pressure or leverage with just my bare hands or a forearm or an elbow, or going to a knife because I have in some ways more control over a knife, and maybe because of where I access it. Claude Werner, we talked about earlier, I think, another PDN contributor, a friend of ours, he always talks about having some intermediate level of force between your wits and your hands and the gun if you're going to carry a gun. And I don't go as far as to say it's a responsibility, but it sure as hell is a good idea.
Gotcha. Cecil, tell us a little bit about crazy monkey boxing.
That's a boxing defensive system that I used to be an instructor with. It's a good, solid system. I've kind of moved on. It's a little more sport oriented. It's a little bit more oriented towards sparring and playing around. And I think you can chase that down a rabbit hole a little too much, where you start, if I throw this punch and this and set it up like this, and like I said, it's that martial art thing of more technique, give me something else to get better at, when we're taking time away from the more life or death things that we need to spend our time on. I mean, myself, I don't do this full time. I may in the future, I don't know, but I have a regular day job. I have a family life. I have certain obligations, that I want to do. And I don't have 10 hours a day, 7 days a week to do whatever I want. I don't get to, I'm not a professional fighter or something like that. I've got to figure out, hey, I've got a couple hours this day, I've got a half hour this day, I can't do anything those 2 days. So I can't just arbitrarily say, I'll play around like something like this that may come into play 0.1% of the time. I need to focus on the stuff that much more likely that I'm going to need, that much more functional. Even as an instructor, I can't waste time on techniques that maybe 5% of the people can really use. I need to, what will most of the people need? So it's more, I'm focused more on that nowadays, as opposed to, I still, my base is still that combat sport aspect, because I think it's important to have that idea of that pressure training and to really be able to go hands-on and test things out. But that doesn't mean we're playing a sport. That doesn't mean we're playing a game. We're using combat sport training methodology, but we're not doing sport.
So let's change gears a little bit. Can you tell us about your competition background?
Sure. I've been competing for a long time. I've done a little bit of here and there. I was Savat is a form of kickboxing based in France. It's been around for a couple hundred years. I was going to, at one point, I was going to compete on some like USA versus France team. We didn't have the money to do that back then, unfortunately. But most of my competition I spent doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. That's been most of my focus. A little bit of wrestling, but most of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's an art that's very functional, very useful, but it also doesn't have the same level of trauma to the person that doing boxing or Muay Thai or Savate had to do. I've been beat up over the years doing all that kind of stuff, boxing when I was in college and all that kind of stuff. I can do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you know, in my middle ages and not have quite the same body trauma that I would have before. So I've been doing that for a very long time. I've competed pretty much from the beginning, back in the bad old days when there wasn't really any Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competitions in the U.S. You either went to Brazil or you had to go to judo tournaments and have all the judo people turn their noses up at you because you were a Jiu-Jitsu guy.
So how does your competition activity help or hurt defensive training?
Hurt. I think it can hurt, like I said, if you start going down that rabbit hole of too much working technique specifically to win that match. What works here against that guy? I have the Masters World Championships coming up, and there's a good chance that in that tournament I'll go against guys I fought in the past, and I can get into that mode of, well, I know he likes to do that, so I can train this, and I should work this technique. But again, there's that wasting of time. There's that wasting of the stuff I need to do. So I have to be very careful about that. The thing about jiu-jitsu that I love so much, though, is that the fundamentals, the base of it, is applicable no matter what. The core stuff, the stuff you learn that first 6 months, the first 2 years of jiu-jitsu, that's stuff that I still use 22 years later as a black belt competing at world championships. So being able to continually use that stuff, going against another guy who's doing his damnedest to not let me pull the move off while he's trying to do mean and hurtful things back to me, and doing that on a regular basis kind of gives me pretty good confidence that I know when I need to use the move, it's gonna work, because the people I'm most likely to have to use it against probably aren't as trained as the guy that I'm competing against or the guy I'm training with on a regular basis.
And how important is general strength and fitness, whether you are competing or taking classes, in relation to technical skill and unarmed defense?
I think you have to have a reasonable level of strength and conditioning. But again, we have to keep the goal the goal. It's very easy when we do some of these things where we're learning a martial art, or we get really into shooting, or we really want to improve our strength and conditioning. It's very easy to make that, oh, I'm going to bench press 300 pounds. I'm going to run a mile in 5 minutes, whatever, where we make that goal the goal, and we lose sight of, let's have the decent fitness level that if we find ourselves in a fight, we can get through it. I mean, the thing that, a lot of people will talk about that, generally a fight, an assault, an ambush, probably is not going to last very long. You're probably not going to get, especially as a private citizen, you're probably not getting into a 2-hour firefight. It might only last 30 seconds, but when you're fighting for your life, that adrenaline dump, that stress, when you're done with it, you're going to feel like you've ran a marathon and done a powerlifting competition all at the same time. So you do have to have some, but it has to be a very reasonable level. You know, we can't just pursue this stuff without thinking. Plus, I mean, if we're realistic about self-defense, self-preservation, I think all of us, we're more likely to have to worry about a heart attack, diabetes, those kind of things. So we've got to have the fitness that we're in shape, that our kidneys aren't going to shut down on us. We're not going to stroke out. We're not going to, you know, have a heart attack climbing the stairs at work. You know, so I think there's a reasonable level, but much past that, then it's if you want to, if it's fun. You know, if you can't get out of a chair without wheezing, you probably need to work on your fitness. Past that, you know, it's what you want to do.
And Rob, what are your thoughts on fitness and unarmed defense and training in general?
I think it's obviously the foundation. I think I agree with what Cecil's saying. Is if you're not functional in your everyday life, that should be a big warning sign, right? If you have trouble carrying, you know, the groceries in, if you have trouble going up and down the stairs, getting up and down out of your chair without help or grunting, yeah, something's wrong. And you're fooling yourself if you think you're going to be able to apply unarmed defensive skills at any high level with limitations to just everyday functioning. I think that leads, I see it a lot, you know, in the firearms world, that leads a lot of people to saying, well, that sounds like a lot of work, or they maybe come up with these excuses, as Cecil alluded to earlier, where, well, I have this condition, or I have this injury, or I have this thing, so I can't do unarmed stuff, so I'm just going to buy a gun. And, you know, years ago, we started the Fit Shot program very specifically to motivate people who were completely unfit to fight, but had guns and may have been great shooters, to take their fitness more seriously. So I think the fitness is the foundation, but certainly people get fanatical about it. You know, if I had to choose between somebody letting their fitness completely go as a student or someone I'm mentoring in terms of self-defense, and someone getting super serious about their fitness, the only potential harm in the chasing it down is, you know, as an owner of a CrossFit gym, I can say that the harm is when you start pushing too hard, when your fitness goals become, you know, unrealistic for you or unreasonable for the average person, and you injure yourself. Because when you're injured, those days that you are in the cast or on the crutches, or you can't move your arm because it's in a sling, you're obviously much more vulnerable as well. So I think people can definitely take it too far.
So we have a live question that just came in for Cecil. What should someone looking to get into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu look for in an instructor? And we can probably stretch this question out as well to what should people look for in their instructors for unarmed defense?
Well, specifically for a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu instructor, one of the things I always look for is how long has he been training? Has he been doing it for a decent amount of time? I hate using this term because it's going to get misconstrued, but what's his lineage? And I hate that, especially from a martial art perspective. But one of the things that's important in jiu-jitsu is that you have a coach, you have a mentor, because ground grappling is so chaotic. There's so much going on. Little tiny shifts. That guy moving his elbow by half an inch completely changes the situation. And it's very easy as a guy with, you know, I've got a couple years in, you go, oh, I know this stuff. And you really don't. I'm still learning stuff. 22 years in, I'm still learning simple things that I should have learned, or I should have knew, or should have figured out for myself years ago. So I think if a instructor does not have a relationship with a mentor, a coach that he can rely on to help him out, that's a big red flag for me. Also, I think that it needs to be, even if he's competitive, even if he likes competition, you should feel included. You shouldn't have to feel like the only way you're going to be a valued member of the gym is if you compete. You should feel like, hey, I'm going to show up, I'm going to train twice a week because I'm looking for a little fitness, a little self-defense, you should be just as accepted in the gym as that guy who says, I want to support the team and go all out and win medals for you. Those are sort of I think the most important things, especially because jiu-jitsu is getting so popular now, and a lot of it is people get really sport-oriented, competition-oriented, which is great. I love that. I think that's awesome. But again, not everybody wants that, and I think jiu-jitsu is such a great art that I want everybody to be included in it. I want, that 5-year-old. My son started when he was 4 years old. My daughter started when she was 11. Like I said, I regularly train with a 70-year-old. I want all those people in. So it's important to me that a jiu-jitsu instructor has that attitude as well.
So say someone's just getting into or interested in personal defense. What's the best martial art for them to become involved in?
The one that they can train at. It's easy to start picking and saying, oh, I like this. I like this one better. But if that person lives in an area, maybe a smaller town, a smaller community, and they don't have that there, the best they have is this other gym that's sort of lower level. Like, as long as the material is still legitimate, as long as it's still taught properly, as long as they're still getting that pressurized resistance training, that's better than nothing. I mean, obviously, I lean towards the combat sport, boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai, Savate, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, different forms of wrestling, judo, because I think it's very easy to know if the stuff's working or not. The instructor shows you a move, you work it, you know if he's BSing you. You will know very, very quickly. You don't have to go 5, 6 years down the line going, yeah, this is an awesome move. You try to pull it off as a self-defense move and you get blitzed. So I lean towards that, but I think there's tons of great arts out there. There's a lot of good self-defense, very tough, dedicated gyms like Krav Maga. Are there lesser Krav Maga places? Sure. Trying to cash in? Sure. But there's also a lot of good ones. I think the main thing to do is you've got to go and you've got to try it out. You've got to get there. It's easy to have this paralysis by analysis. What's the best art? The one you're training in. Because at the very least you're doing something. Yeah. Join me at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. That would be my pat answer. But again, if you're living next door to the best Krav Maga school in the world, go jump in on it. That's I think the best answer I could give.
Rob, what do you think about that? What do you think is the best martial art for someone interested in personal defense?
Yeah, I've said for a long time that I think that if someone spends 6 months, and obviously all the caveats to a good school, right? If somebody's going to spend 6 months in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and then practice everything they learned in that first 6 months, for the rest of their lives at whatever frequency makes sense, that's probably a really good base, especially if you combine it with some kind of a good close quarters striking art like Muay Thai. So if you do, 3 months of Muay Thai and 6 months of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and then keep the practice of those fundamentals up. You asked a question earlier about too many techniques. I don't know that you need to keep learning a whole bunch of stuff from a baseline defensive skills, but the things that you learn in those early months and early positions of those two arts, for example, I think would make you pretty well-rounded. And I absolutely think that a good Krav Maga school, if you want to stay and you want to do the art, you want to do it 3 times a week, 2 times a week for the rest of your life, formally learning, probably a good Krav Maga school is going to be really well-rounded as well, because it does combine a lot of the good close quarters striking stuff with some of the ideas of the grounded and grappling stuff. And like again, if you get a good school, then the training model is going to be applied to defensive training, not sport training, which I like. And obviously, at Endeavor, we have a Krav school along with the CrossFit gym for that very reason. And the approach, I think, it links really well with someone who's serious about defense, not as serious about the art. And Cecil, I'd actually be curious about Cecil's thoughts on the idea of kind of going in and learning the fundamentals and then finding good quality people to practice with, or do absolutely advocate continuing with the progress in the art?
Yes to both. I think it's a very much an individual thing. Here's the problem is it's very difficult to teach fundamentals that, even though we're talking about a handful of fundamentals, to the point where a person can use it in a short amount of time. 6 months is good for sure, but again, maybe it's my own OCD with my own stuff, but like I said, 20 plus years, and I'm still working on the first couple things I've learned, that I learned 20 plus years ago, that I think is not quite good enough yet. I think, I don't think it's a lot of different than shooting. Yeah, you can shoot, but, the guy's going to practice. He's going to go to the range and get some more rounds now. Well, how different is that when your dad showed you how to shoot, whatever, 30 years ago, 20 years ago? We're always trying to get better at it. But I do think, again, with the caveat that it's a good school, good instructor, yeah, 6 months of solid practice, consistent practice under a good coach, 3 to 6 months of a good striking system, then having guys that you can bang around with, put some gear on, and hey, I'm going to punch you in the head now. Okay, cool, no problem. One thing I would add, though, that I do think is important, even in a school, even in like a defense-oriented school, I think no matter what, you still have to be specifically taking some kind of training that pushes you out of the comfort zone and specifically integrates all of it. The Rob's ECQT work, Craig Douglas's ECQC class, that kind of stuff. You still need to do that. You still need to have that integrated, talk about situational awareness, how to put all that stuff together. That's sort of like the wraparound when you've got the fundamental moves. Because the moves in and of itself are good to have, but we still need to understand application, which you don't always get in that first 6 months, year of training. It's one of the things where I think that value of that outside instructor who's done this kind of stuff, who's spent time thinking about that. Okay, great. I've got my grounding in this stuff. Now I'll take that course.
And you said something earlier about the variables and the importance of coaching and mentoring, even for someone who's really skilled in the unarmed combatives, and especially in the grappling arts. I think I can't agree with you more, as a firearms guy primarily, that the variables are much fewer, right? And if you take it outside of the part where we have to fight to the gun, which again brings us back to grappling, beyond 2 arms reach, chests and heads they're all kind of in the same size range. The distances are all pretty predictable based on your environment, your house, your workspace, where you're going to actually use a pistol to defend yourself. Like, we can kind of narrow the variables down for defensive shooting a lot faster than we can take the variables of the surface you're on. Are you seated? Are you against the wall? Are you, is the guy twice the size of you? Is he half the size of you but faster? Is he stronger? Is he technically skilled? Are there 3 of them? Are there 2 of them? When we start thinking about unarmed fights, the variables multiply fast. So I think that point you made, I want to emphasize that from my perspective. I fully agree that the variables are so much more important in terms of how you apply those skill sets, because when we shoot a piece of paper and it represents a silhouette of a human being, it kind of is one-to-one. When you throw that elbow strike against a bag, wow, the variables I think are so much more there. I mean, just the idea of where that person's hands end up as you're trying to throw that strike is something that, who cares about somebody's hand in front of their chest when you're shooting, right? So I think that was a really important point that may have snuck through there that we hit on earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something I see, especially as I go around and do seminars and I, do the road show and I'm teaching different people, and maybe it's somebody I saw a year before and they listened to what I said. They definitely got it, and they have 80% of it, but then they're missing 20%, and I got to go back and fix, not fix, but add to that. And there's so many little things. It's just, it's never ending in this, and even outside of the actual contact, I think that pre-fight thing can be never ending. The variables on that are huge and immense, and you can't just go, I read a book, I understand it. It's a lot of training, a lot of work. You got to have somebody who knows what they're doing to tell you, hey, this is a good idea, maybe you should have done this. You know, it's sometimes we go, oh man, we have so much to train. Well, yeah, but you know, I always tell people it's not a destination. You know, it's just a road. So let's just keep training.
So tell us about where people could train with you. You're going to be in, I think, Dallas, Tampa, and Chicago. Tell us a little bit about your upcoming seminars where people can come and train with you.
Yeah, I'm in. I'm in Dallas early October, I think 10th and 11th, and I've been going back to Dallas. This is my 5th year, maybe. Good group, good core group. A lot of really good people. Some air marshals, some other law enforcement guys. Caleb Causey, a buddy of mine, and guys that I think people at PDN have heard about. Really good dude. He's going to be there. He came and trained with me last year. He's always fun. Tampa, end of October, and that'll be new for me, so I'm kind of, you know, excited to do that. Chicago in November 8th, 9th, 7th, 8th, whatever that weekend is, and that'll be really good. I get to hang out with a couple of my close friends and peers and people I work with, Larry Lindemann and Paul Sharp, both phenomenal trainers and fighters, and it'll be great to do a seminar with them looking over my shoulder and pointing out all the things I'm doing wrong, because I know that they will do that. That's the bulk, and I kind of, it's hard because a lot of my training is sometimes I push seminars months down the line because I'm kind of selfish about my own training. So in November I've got some things coming up that I'm doing myself, that I'm looking for training with different people too. So November, December is a little lighter, and then I hit it back again in 2016. And then I teach weekly. I teach weekly here in Phoenix. I teach a stand-up class and fundamentals of jiu-jitsu class here in Phoenix.
So we got a couple more live questions. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Rob.
Just where can people find the information on your weekly classes too in Phoenix down there, Cecil?
Oh, the easiest place for the weekly classes is www.teammegaton.com. That's my coach, Megaton Diaz, who's literally a legend in jiu-jitsu. I've been training with him from day one. He's been my coach the entire time. Awesome competitor, phenomenal coach. What he knows, what he's forgotten, you know, it's the cliche. He's forgotten more about jiu-jitsu than I'll ever learn. And it's his gym, and I teach out of that. I'm honored that he's asked me to run his, you know, all the new guys come through me first.
Awesome. We have one more live question. For those of you that are listening live, both Rob and Cecil will be on after this PDN live session, and they'll be able to answer any questions in the comment section below afterwards. So, Cecil, would you consider that the philosophy of the system is more important than the system itself? Example, survival versus sport. So it's more about the mindset than the physical training.
I don't think it's either or. I don't think you can. I think it has to be both. Because you could have an awesome philosophy backed by horrible physical actions, and then you could have awesome physical actions backed by, you know, the wrong philosophy, a contextually inappropriate philosophy. So I think it's very much both. Maybe that's a wishy-washy answer, but I can't separate those two.
What about you, Rob? What do you think about the survival versus sport and the philosophy behind the training and the system?
I have seen a lot of really compelling and well-articulated philosophy backed by horrifyingly, you know, inappropriate, weak contextually misplaced techniques. So I've seen a lot of people who talk a good game, in other words, and this is mostly coming from firearms world. I guess to a certain extent, you'll have people who are defenders of any given martial art about how, that was the original kind of UFC concept, right? Well, which art was going to be best? And we know that mixed martial arts is what's best, and integrated with weapons and armed defense as well is what's really best. So the idea of which art is best doesn't make any sense, really, but there are certainly people who I've watched in the firearms, you can read their articles, you can see the advertisements or watch the descriptions and maybe read their resumes and think, wow, this is going to be the greatest, most realistic, most awesome applied skill defensive firearms class I could ever take. And then you go out there and it's, the NRA basic pistol class, target shooting with fancy words, trying to shoot tight groups and bullseyes. So I think philosophy, you got to be a little bit skeptical about philosophy and really see what people are doing, and then analyze it and see if it actually fits the context of your intended use.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, guys, for joining us tonight on tonight's topic of unarmed self-defense. Thank you, Cecil. And can you tell us again the website where we can find more information about you, your training, seminars, where to find you?
My website, best place to get in touch with me or find out what's going on in my little world is iacombatives.com.
Awesome. And then again, he'll be in Dallas in October 10th and 11th, Tampa 25th and 26th, and Chicago in November. And Rob, thank you for joining us tonight. Where can we find you, and where will you be?
Well, I'm going down to Arizona. I'm going to hang out. Actually, going to see Cecil in a couple weeks. We're going to have our annual instructor conference, and the CFS instructor conference, of course, we'll have instructors in from all over the country, but most importantly, probably for people listening right now, is that there are opportunities to train with our team. So we run end-user classes in the background of the instructor conferences. The instructors come in a couple days early, and then they get to work together, polish their teaching skills, look at some of the new drills, things that have changed, evolved, and work together for end-user classes over the weekend. So last weekend in September down in Phoenix, Phoenix Firearms is hosting us down there. So John Abel and his crew, and they can learn about that at icetraining.us. Just check out our calendar, and of course personaldefensenetwork.com. That's why where we're putting out all of the free videos, articles. Premium members get access to more. Cecil's done 2 DVDs with us. There's some video clips of his stuff out there. He mentioned Caleb Causey. A lot of who we talked about tonight are contributors. A lot of our friends. The reason that they're all contributing to the Personal Defense Network is because of the size of that 280,000 strong group of community that we've got, people interested in this kind of information. So personaldefensenetwork.com, best place to go for the information, and you can find the contributors and all of our schedules through there.
Hey Cecil, real quick, are there any prereqs for your classes in Chicago and Texas and all over? Is there anything that people need to do before?
Nope. I set it up purposefully. I don't care what your background is. I don't care what your condition is. I'll make it work no matter what. I want everybody a shot.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, guys. And for those of you that are listening, stick around after the show. Both Rob and Cecil will be answering questions in the comments section. And if you like what you're seeing, sign up for the PDN newsletter. The link is down below. Thank you, guys, and have a great night, everybody.
Thanks very much, Shannon.